The morning sun beat down on Palm Beach's pristine streets as Officer David Chen sat in his patrol car, sipping his third coffee of the day. It was supposed to be a routine morning shift, but fate had other plans. A sleek black SUV caught his attention as it smoothly cruised past the speed limit near Mar-a-Lago's secured entrance. Chen flicked on his lights and sirens, following standard procedure. The SUV pulled over immediately, showing clear cooperation. As he approached the vehicle, he noticed its high-end features and diplomatic-style tint, common in this wealthy neighborhood. The driver, a well-dressed black man in his 40s, already had his license and registration ready. "Good morning, sir. Do you know why I pulled you over today?" Chen asked, following his usual script. The driver nodded respectfully. "I apologize if I was going a bit fast, officer. I'm actually heading to pick up Mr. Trump for an important meeting." Something in Chen's demeanor shifted. Despite the driver's professional appearance and calm explanation, the officer's questions became more pointed. "Step out of the vehicle, please." The morning heat grew more intense as the situation escalated. The driver tried explaining again, reaching for his phone. "Sir, I can call Mr. Trump's office right now to verify." "Hands where I can see them." Chen's voice carried across the empty street. His hand instinctively moved toward his holster, emotion caught clearly on his body camera. What started as a simple traffic stop was quickly spinning into something else. Chen ordered a full vehicle search, making the driver stand in the hot sun. Passing cars slowed down to watch, some people pulling out their phones to record the scene. The driver maintained his composure, but his face showed growing frustration and concern. Inside the SUV, Chen found nothing but a leather briefcase containing scheduling documents and a Mar-a-Lago security badge. Everything was in perfect order, but he kept searching, convinced something was off. His mind was clouded by assumptions he'd later struggle to explain. 20 minutes into the stop, Chen's radio crackled. The station was getting calls from Mar-a-Lago's security office. Trump was waiting for his driver, and he wasn't happy. The situation was about to explode onto national headlines, but Chen didn't know it yet. He was too focused on his gut feeling, a feeling that would soon cost him his career. As he continued the search, more patrol cars arrived, responding to Chen's call for backup. The scene had turned into exactly what the driver had tried to avoid, a spectacle. Neighbors emerged from their million-dollar homes, witnessing a scene that would soon divide their community and spark a national conversation about power, privilege, and profiling. The driver stood silently, his perfectly pressed suit now wrinkled from the heat, watching as his quiet morning transformed into a pivotal moment in his life. He'd driven this route hundreds of times before, past this same spot without incident. But today was different. Today would change everything, not just for him, but for Officer Chen, the Palm Beach Police Department, and even former President Trump himself. Little did anyone know that hidden in this ordinary morning was the spark that would ignite a firestorm of controversy, legal battles, and unexpected alliances. The body camera footage was still rolling, capturing every moment of what would soon become a viral symbol of America's ongoing struggle with law enforcement reform. As the sun climbed higher in the Florida sky, the consequences of this traffic stop were already racing toward them all, about to collide with the force of a tidal wave. The quiet Palm Beach morning was just the calm before the storm, a storm that would leave no one unchanged in its wake. Inside Mar-a-Lago's lavish meeting room, Trump paced back and forth, his face growing redder by the minute. He'd been waiting for 30 minutes, and patience wasn't his strong suit. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his security team explaining the situation unfolding just minutes away from his front gate. "This is unacceptable," he barked into his phone, his voice echoing off the gilded walls. "My driver has worked here for 5 years. 5 years." The room fell silent as staff members exchanged nervous glances. They'd seen him angry before, but this was different. This was personal. His driver wasn't just an employee. He was part of Trump's inner circle, someone he trusted with his daily movements and private conversations. The man had passed every security clearance, background check, and vetting process imaginable. The fact that he was being treated like a suspicious character less than a mile from where he worked daily struck a nerve with the former president. "Get me the police chief," Trump demanded, already dialing numbers on his second phone. His assistant scrambled to find the contact information while social media was exploding with videos of the incident. The location tag, Mar-a-Lago, was trending, and news vans were already racing toward Palm Beach. The police chief was in his morning briefing when his secretary burst in with the urgent message. His face dropped as he watched the body camera footage that was already circulating online. Officer Chen's actions were becoming a nightmare for the department, and now the former president was personally involved. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump was doing something that surprised even his closest advisors. He was defending someone's civil rights with genuine anger and conviction. This officer, he said during a heated call with the police chief, needs to understand that you can't just harass people because of how they look. Not in Palm Beach, not anywhere. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. News anchors were already preparing their evening segments, trying to reconcile this moment with Trump's previous statements about law enforcement. But in the marble-floored halls of Mar-a-Lago, politics took a backseat to personal loyalty. Trump's legal team was mobilizing faster than the news crews. They weren't just angry, they were prepared. Years of handling high-profile situations had taught them to move quickly. Within hours, they had gathered security footage from Mar-a-Lago's gates showing the driver's regular comings and goings, his spotless employment record, and statements from other officers who recognized him as a regular part of Trump's security detail. The police chief found himself caught in a storm. His phone was ringing nonstop. The mayor, the press, civil rights organizations, and Trump's lawyers all demanded answers. Officer Chen's body camera footage was being analyzed frame by frame on national television, with experts pointing out every questionable moment of the stop. As the afternoon wore on, Trump's driver finally arrived at Mar-a-Lago, his usual professional demeanor strained but unbroken. Trump met him in the private quarters, away from the chaos erupting outside. The conversation that followed would later be described by witnesses as both touching and surprising, the former president listening intently as his driver described similar experiences throughout his life. "This ends today," Trump declared, emerging from the meeting with renewed determination. His next call wasn't to his lawyers or the press, it was to the driver's family, personally assuring them that their husband and father would be vindicated. The sun was setting over Palm Beach, but the day's events had set in motion a chain reaction that would shake the community to its core. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing the growing crowd of protesters and supporters gathering outside the police department. Inside Mar-a-Lago, Trump and his team were preparing for a battle that would test loyalties, challenge perceptions, and force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and justice in America. The Palm Beach Police Department's Internal Affairs Office buzzed with unusual energy at 7 a.m. the next morning. Lieutenant Rodriguez, a veteran investigator with salt and pepper hair, sat at his desk reviewing Officer Chen's complete service record. His coffee grew cold as he dug deeper into a pattern that made his stomach turn. "You need to see this," he called to his partner, pushing a folder across the desk. The folder contained complaints from the past 18 months, traffic stops that went too long, searches that seemed unnecessary, a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Each incident shared uncomfortable similarities with what happened outside Mar-a-Lago. Meanwhile, the department's tech team worked overtime analyzing body camera footage. Not just from yesterday's incident, but from every traffic stop Chen had conducted in the past year. The tech room's walls were covered with screenshots, timelines, and data charts. One young analyst noticed something crucial. Chen's traffic stops averaged 38 minutes when the driver was a minority, but only 12 minutes for other drivers. Outside, news crews camped in the Florida heat, their satellite trucks creating a makeshift media village in the department's parking lot. The story had exploded overnight. Social media was flooded with clips of the incident, each one analyzed and debated by millions. Trump's driver had become an unintentional symbol of a much larger conversation. The police chief called an emergency meeting with his command staff. The conference room was tense as they reviewed the preliminary findings. "This goes beyond one traffic stop," Lieutenant Rodriguez explained, pointing to the data displayed on the screen. "We're seeing a clear pattern of behavior that violates department policy." Body camera footage from other officers who responded to the scene revealed more concerns. Their microphones had picked up Chen making comments that made the room fall silent. The chief removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. This was worse than they'd initially thought. Meanwhile, Trump's legal team had hired an independent investigator, a retired FBI agent who specialized in civil rights cases. His presence at the department raised eyebrows, but his reputation for fairness earned him cooperation. He worked methodically, interviewing officers who had partnered with Chen, reviewing dashcam footage, and building a timeline of events. The investigation uncovered something unexpected. Several officers had previously reported concerns about Chen's behavior, but the complaints had somehow never made it up the chain of command. A young officer broke down during her interview, describing how she'd witnessed similar incidents but felt powerless to speak up against a senior officer. By afternoon, the department's parking lot had become a gathering place for community members. They weren't angry protesters. These were local residents sharing stories. A real estate agent described being held for an hour while Chen searched his car. A doctor recalled being made to sit on the curb in his scrubs. Each story added another piece to the puzzle. The chief's secretary knocked on his door with more news. The state attorney's office was sending representatives. This had grown beyond an internal affairs investigation. The chief glanced out his window at the media circus below, knowing that every decision from this point would be scrutinized nationally. Inside the tech room, analysts made another discovery. Chen's dashboard camera had malfunctioned during several previous controversial stops. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. The tech team worked late into the night, recovering deleted footage that would prove crucial to the investigation. Trump's driver visited the department to give his official statement. His calm demeanor impressed everyone as he recounted not just his own experience, but similar incidents he'd witnessed over his 20-year career as a professional driver. His testimony painted a picture of systemic issues that went far beyond one officer or one department. As the sun set on another intense day, Lieutenant Rodriguez sat alone in his office, reviewing his preliminary report. The evidence was overwhelming, but the implications were complex. This case would force the department and the community to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, accountability, and the delicate balance between law enforcement and civil rights. The investigation was revealing more than just one officer's misconduct. It was exposing cracks in the system itself. The question now wasn't just about Chen's future with the department, but about how to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The eyes of the nation were watching, waiting to see how Palm Beach would handle this moment of truth. The police chief's office felt smaller than usual that morning, crowded with department lawyers, union representatives, and senior staff. The Venetian blinds were closed against the bright Florida sun, but camera flashes still occasionally burst through the gaps as photographers tried to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside. The chief sat at his desk, his usually crisp uniform showing wrinkles from the sleepless night before. In front of him lay Officer Chen's personnel file, the internal affairs report, and a single sheet of paper that would end a 15-year career in law enforcement. "Are we certain about this?" asked the department's legal advisor, adjusting his tie nervously. "This decision will have huge implications." The chief nodded slowly, remembering his own start as a rookie cop 30 years ago. He promised himself then that if he ever made it to this position, he'd always do what was right, not what was easy. Outside, the morning sun baked the crowd that had gathered. News crews interviewed local residents, while police supporters stood quietly with signs supporting the department. The crowd was a mix of emotions and opinions, but remained peaceful, their presence a testament to how deeply this case had touched the community. The chief's intercom buzzed. Officer Chen had arrived. The room fell silent as he entered, still in uniform, his face a mask of practiced calm. His union representative stood close by, ready to protest what they all knew was coming. "Please, sit down," the chief said, his voice carrying the weight of what was to come. He began reading from the termination notice, listing the violations one by one. The pattern of profiling, the discriminatory behavior, the falsified reports. Each point landed like a hammer blow in the quiet room. Chen's face remained stoic, but his hands gripped his knees tightly. His union rep tried to interject several times, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recently recovered dashboard camera footage, the statistical analysis of his traffic stops, the testimonies from other officers and community members. There was no defending it anymore. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop across town, Trump's driver sat with his family, watching the news unfold on the wall-mounted TV. His teenage son gripped his hand, proud of how his father had handled himself through all of this. They weren't celebrating anyone losing their job. Instead, they'd felt the weight of change happening in their community. Back at the station, the chief finished reading the termination notice. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" he asked Chen. The room held its breath, waiting. Chen looked up, and for a moment, something cracked in his professional facade. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly, but even he didn't seem to believe it anymore. The statistics didn't lie. The pattern was clear. His actions had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The chief stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Please turn in your badge and weapon to Lieutenant Rodriguez." His voice was firm but not unkind. This wasn't a moment of triumph, it was a necessary step toward accountability. As Chen left the office, the hallway fell silent. Officers who had worked with him for years watched as he walked past, some looking away, others meeting his eyes with mixed emotions. This wasn't just about one officer anymore, it was about confronting uncomfortable truths within their own ranks. The department's public information officer stepped out to face the media, reading a prepared statement about the termination. But the real story was happening inside, where officers gathered in small groups, discussing what this meant for their department and their profession. Trump watched the announcement from Mar-a-Lago, his usual bombastic style subdued. "This isn't about politics," he told his advisors. "This is about doing what's right." For once, people on all sides of the political spectrum found themselves agreeing with him, even if they were surprised by it. By sunset, Chen's locker had been cleared out, his name removed from the duty roster. The chief sat alone in his office, writing a department-wide memo about moving forward, about learning from this, about being better. Outside his window, the media trucks were already packing up, moving on to the next story. But for the Palm Beach Police Department, this wasn't the end, it was a beginning. The chief looked at the stack of applications for the new Community Oversight Board on his desk, knowing that real change would take more than just removing one officer. It would take commitment, transparency, and the courage to keep looking in the mirror, no matter how uncomfortable the reflection might be. The morning after Officer Chen's termination, Palm Beach woke up to a community divided. The local diner, usually a peaceful spot where police officers and residents shared morning coffee, had become an unexpected battleground of opinions. Regular customers chose sides of the restaurant based on their views, creating an invisible line down the middle of the checkered floor. At one table, retired officers spoke in hushed, angry tones about loyalty and procedure. "You can't just throw away 15 years of service," one whispered, stirring his coffee with unnecessary force. "We all make split-second decisions out there." Across the room, a group of local business owners had a different view. "My son gets pulled over at least twice a month," said a well-dressed restaurant owner, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "Same car, same route, same story, every time." Outside the police station, a crowd gathered early. Police union representatives set up a podium, preparing to make their stand. Their spokesperson, a veteran officer with 30 years on the force, practiced his speech defending Chen. But as he looked at his notes, he couldn't help noticing the growing crowd of community members sharing their own stories of similar encounters. The local news crew interviewed a surprising voice, a former partner of Chen's who decided to speak up. "I saw the signs," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "We all did. But it was easier to look away, to make excuses. That stops now." At Mar-a-Lago, Trump's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old allies in law enforcement wanted him to back down, to soften his stance. But watching his driver play with his grandkids in the garden, Trump stood firm. "Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone," he told his advisors, surprising them with his unwavering position. The police union called an emergency meeting in the community center. The large room was packed, humid with tension and Florida heat. Officers' families sat together, many wearing blue ribbons in support. But as community members stood to share their experiences, the mood began to shift. A young officer, barely 2 years on the force, stood up despite worried looks from her colleagues. "I became a cop to protect and serve everyone," she said, her voice gaining strength. If we can't admit when we're wrong, how can we expect the community to trust us? Local church leaders organized a town hall meeting, hoping to bridge the growing divide. The gymnasium was split down the middle, Union supporters on one side, Reform advocates on the other. But something unexpected happened as people began to speak. Stories were shared, tears were shed, and slowly the invisible line began to blur. Back at the station, the chief faced another challenge. Officers were choosing sides, affecting partnerships and shift dynamics. Some refused to ride with those who supported the termination, while others quietly requested transfers to different units. A group of veteran officers met at their usual coffee spot, away from the cameras and crowds. Their conversation was different now, more reflective. Maybe, one said slowly, this is our wake-up call. Maybe we needed this. Trump's driver visited local schools, not to talk about the incident, but to mentor young kids interested in law enforcement careers. This isn't about one bad apple, he told them. It's about making sure the whole tree stays healthy. The local paper's editorial board struggled with their weekend piece. The editor stared at two possible headlines, knowing their choice would affect the community's healing process. Finally, they chose Palm Beach at a Crossroads: How One Incident Could Unite a Divided Community. As evening fell, a spontaneous gathering formed in the park near the police station. Someone brought candles, another brought coffee. Officers and residents stood together, not in protest or celebration, but in reflection. The conversations were quiet, honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary. The police chief walked through the crowd, not in uniform, but as a member of the community. He stopped to listen to stories, shake hands, and most importantly, learn. This wasn't just about firing one officer anymore. It was about rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. A young rookie, watching from the edge of the gathering, turned to his training officer. "What happens now?" he asked. The veteran officer watched the mingling crowd, seeing longtime barriers slowly breaking down. "Now," she said, "we do better. We be better." As night fell on Palm Beach, the community remained divided, but something had changed. The conversations were different now, more open, more honest. It wasn't comfortable, but real change never is. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in a park lit by candlelight, a community took its first steps toward healing. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as former Officer Chen climbed them slowly, flanked by his legal team. His police uniform was replaced by a navy blue suit that seemed slightly too big, making him look smaller somehow. The wrongful termination lawsuit he'd filed was about to shake Palm Beach to its core. Inside the courthouse lobby, Trump's driver straightened his tie, preparing to give his deposition. His wife squeezed his hand, both remembering similar moments in their lives when speaking up seemed harder than staying quiet. But this time was different. This time, they weren't alone. The legal teams set up in opposite conference rooms. Chen's lawyers spread out statistics about officer retention rates and departmental commendations. Down the hall, the department's attorneys reviewed body camera footage on laptops, while civil rights attorneys hired by Trump pored over years of traffic stop data. "Your Honor," Chen's lawyer began in the preliminary hearing, "this is about a decorated officer who followed standard procedures and was fired to appease a powerful political figure." The judge, a veteran of 30 years on the bench, looked over her glasses, already seeing the complexity of what lay ahead. In the courthouse cafeteria, two rookie officers on their lunch break watched the proceedings on a small TV. "I don't know what to think anymore," one admitted quietly. "Everything we learned at the academy seems different now." His partner nodded, both understanding that their generation of officers would have to find a new way forward. The case took an unexpected turn when Chen's former partners started coming forward. One brought records of conversations where he tried to address concerns about profiling. Another shared dashcam footage she'd saved, worried that someday it would be needed. Each piece of evidence painted a picture that went beyond one traffic stop. Trump surprised everyone by showing up to the courthouse himself. No grand entrance, no media circus. He slipped in through a side door to sit quietly in support of his driver. The image of the former president in the back row, listening intently to testimony about racial profiling, made headlines nationwide. During a lunch recess, Chen sat alone in a courthouse corridor. A senior officer who'd trained him years ago walked by, stopped, then sat down beside him. No words were exchanged, but the moment spoke volumes about the bonds being tested and transformed. The driver's testimony lasted 3 hours. He spoke not with anger, but with a steady clarity about that morning and the larger patterns it represented. When asked about previous incidents, he described them matter-of-factly, letting the facts speak for themselves. The courtroom sat in complete silence, absorbing the weight of years of similar stories. Outside, community members gathered with signs, not in protest, but in support of change. Local business owners provided free coffee and snacks. People from different sides of the issue found themselves sharing tables, sharing stories, sharing perspectives they'd never considered before. The department's legal team presented their evidence methodically. Traffic stop statistics, complaint patterns, body camera footage. But it was the testimony of fellow officers that hit hardest, stories of witnessing problematic behavior and feeling powerless to address it. Chen's union representative testified about the challenges officers face, the split-second decisions required, the constant pressure. But under cross-examination, he struggled to explain away the clear patterns in Chen's behavior. The courtroom watched as decades of ingrained defenses began to crack. During an afternoon break, Trump's driver found himself in the same elevator as Chen. The tension was thick enough to touch. But as they rode in silence, both men saw something unexpected in each other's eyes. Not hatred, not anger, but a shared wariness with the system that had brought them to this point. The judge called both legal teams to her chambers late one afternoon. "This case is about more than one officer or one traffic stop," she said, removing her glasses. "Whatever we decide here will echo far beyond Palm Beach." As the sun set behind the courthouse, casting long shadows across its marble steps, the various parties gathered for settlement discussions. The conversations were difficult, honest, sometimes heated. But slowly, something new began to emerge, not just a resolution to this case, but a blueprint for preventing future ones. The media waited outside for statements, but the real story was happening in small moments throughout the building. A young officer asking an older one tough questions about tradition versus progress. Chen sitting quietly with his thoughts, watching his career and beliefs undergo public examination. Trump's driver showing his teenage son what it means to stand up for change without seeking revenge. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It had become a moment of reckoning, a chance for real change. As night fell on Palm Beach, the courthouse lights still burned, while inside, the hard work of transformation continued. The settlement conference room felt too small for the weight of the moment. Morning light streamed through tall windows as lawyers shuffled papers and participants took their seats. Former Officer Chen sat at one end of the long table, while Trump's driver sat at the other. The space between them held months of tension, controversy, and community soul-searching. The police chief arrived early, carrying a thick folder of proposed departmental reforms. These weren't just quick fixes or empty promises, they represented real change. New training programs, community oversight committees, regular traffic stop audits, body camera review protocols, each measure crafted from lessons learned during this ordeal. "Before we begin," the mediator said, "I want everyone to understand. What we decide today will affect more than just Palm Beach." The room nodded, feeling the responsibility of the moment. News crews waited outside, but this wasn't about headlines anymore. This was about fixing something broken. Trump watched from a side room, unusually quiet. His driver had become more than an employee through all this. He'd become a symbol of change. But more importantly, he'd become a friend. The former president's usual bombastic style had been replaced by something more reflective. Chen spoke first, surprising everyone. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said, his voice steady but humbled. "Looking back at my record, at the statistics, I see things I didn't want to see before." The room held its breath as he continued, sharing insights from months of required counseling and implicit bias training. The driver's response was equally powerful. "This isn't about punishment," he said, looking directly at Chen. "It's about making sure our children grow up in a different world than we did." His teenage son, sitting nearby, straightened with pride as his father spoke about turning pain into progress. As the settlement terms were discussed, something unexpected happened. The conversation shifted from compensation to transformation. Both sides began offering ideas for real change. The driver suggested a program where officers would spend time in the communities they served, not as law enforcement, but as neighbors. Chen, drawing from his own journey of realization, proposed a peer review system where officers would help each other recognize and correct biased behavior before it became a pattern. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned difficult lessons the hard way. Outside, the community had gathered again, but the atmosphere was different now. The invisible lines that had divided them months ago had blurred. Officers chatted with protesters. Community leaders shared coffee with union representatives. They weren't there to take sides anymore. They were there to witness change. The settlement's final terms were comprehensive. Yes, there was financial compensation, but the real victory was in the reforms. Mandatory bias training that went beyond PowerPoint presentations, regular traffic stop audits with public reporting, a civilian oversight board with real power, and most surprisingly, a new community outreach program jointly led by Chen and the driver. "This is just the beginning," the police chief announced to the waiting media. But the real story was happening behind him, where Chen and the driver shook hands, both men changed by the journey that had brought them here. Trump's brief statement caught everyone off guard with its simplicity. Sometimes leadership means admitting when change is needed. Today, Palm Beach leads by example. The reforms rolled out slowly but steadily. Officers attended community dinners, not as security, but as guests. Training programs were revamped with input from both law enforcement and civilian perspectives. Traffic stop data was publicly posted monthly, holding the department accountable through transparency. 6 months later, Chen stood before a group of police cadets, sharing his story not as a cautionary tale, but as a pathway to growth. The driver sat in the back, nodding supportively. Their unlikely partnership had become a model for other departments nationwide. The local diner, once divided by invisible lines, now hosted monthly community police dialogues. Officers and residents shared meals and stories, building bridges one conversation at a time. The rookie who'd questioned everything during the trial now led these discussions, helping both sides understand each other better. Trump's driver still worked his regular route, but something had changed. Officers who pulled him over now knew his story, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. Some even thanked him for helping transform their department into something better. As palm trees swayed in the evening breeze, the police chief sat in his office, reviewing the latest traffic stop statistics. The numbers showed improvement, but more importantly, the community felt it. Trust was rebuilding, slowly but surely. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. A template for other communities facing similar challenges. A reminder that change, though difficult, is possible when people choose growth over division, understanding over anger, progress over comfort. The sun set on Palm Beach, but the light of transformation continued to shine, lighting a path forward for communities across America. The story of a traffic stop had become something more, a testament to the power of turning conflict into conversation, pain into progress, and division into unity.